One.
Afternoon, it is 5:31 p.m. The budget workshop number 2 of the Board of Trustees of San Luis I.S.D. held this June 16, 2021. It is now called to order. Ms. Hernandez, roll call, please.
Please let the record show that all board members are present, with one board member, Ms. Garcia, being logged in virtually.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. On March 16, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meetings laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to the coronavirus. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. We have a quorum in attendance. Members of the public are attending in person or by use of telephone conference call, online access, and the use of an email link for questions. If a member of the public submitted written comments in advance, the board president or a member of the administration will read the comments into record before or during the board's consideration of that item. If you would like to provide comment at a future meeting conducted by video conference or telephone call, please follow instructions on the meeting's notice. All other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practical. An audio recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. We apologize in advance for any unforeseeable difficulties and ask for your patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. If you have any questions about these suspended laws, please call the Office of the Attorney General at 888-672-6787 or by email at toma@oag.texas.gov. Proceed with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now continue with the I.S.D. mission statement. I.S.D. mission is to graduate students with skills to meet the demands of a changing world by promoting student success as non-negotiable, channeling resources to match the learning needs of students, employ and retain quality staff so that San Luis is a proud, innovative, and academically superior district. Item 2, open forum. Mr. Smith, you have no one for open forum. Moving on to item 3. New business board action items 3A, budget workshop number 2, 2021 and 2022. Mr. Miguel Rodriguez, Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Rodriguez, you have the floor.
Good evening, Board President Lee-Cohen, Board members, and Superintendent Dr. Mr. Chavez. Tonight, we'll have the second budget workshop. The final budget meeting, the budget adoption next week. So, at budget workshop number 1, the detail there was a little bit more specific. It involved items like your gold pennies, your copper pennies, and it showed a lot more of the assumptions that were considered when developing the budget. This budget workshop number 2 is going to take a higher level view on it. It's more of a macro, and then the idea is that the final budget adoption next year would be the final culmination of the total budget. It would be just the actual schedule itself. So with that said, if we can move on to the first slide, you'll see a funding update regarding the state legislative session. It ended May 31st. Pretty much nothing changed in terms of funding. House Bill 3 stayed the same. It's important to note that they did not increase the basic allotment. There was the cleanup bill for House Bill 3, which was House Bill 1525, and that did fix the CT funding, which means we'll get a little bit more money because the weight on that will now be, it'll be the basic allotment times the small and mid-size adjustment times the CT weight, which is what we'll get. Previously, we're only getting the basic allotment plus the CT funding, so we'll get a little bit more there. And then there's also the return of the GT allotment. This allotment was eliminated with House Bill 3. And so we were required to keep the GT program intact, so we kept funding the GT program even though the state was no longer funding that amount. That that allotment was brought back in with this bill. It's still capped at 5% of District 88. And the difference now though is that they're capping the program statewide at 100 million. So for both of those, we will get a little bit more money, but until more information is released, I don't have those specific numbers. Another important one is the last bullet on this slide. There was talk and there was a bill that went through regarding adding restrictions to fund balance, meaning you couldn't carry too high of a fund balance. That didn't make it through legislation, so that's not an issue. On the next slide, you'll see a graph of the basic allotment. And so here, the last 2 years on the far right-hand side, that is the biennium that we are now entering, year 2021, 22, and year 22 to 23. So here's where you see that the basic allotment remains the same. Is the history on this one, on this graph, the trend is, if you look at from the very beginning, we had 4 years where the funding stayed the same and then it went up. Then you had another 4 years where the funding stayed at 5140 and it went up to 6160. So it looks like that's kind of what the state's doing, increasing funding and keeping it steady for about 4 years. So we kind of have to live with the same amount of money per student for that 4 year span. The next slide, here you'll see a graph of the enrollment. So even though we have to live with the same amount of money per student, unfortunately, we continue to see declining enrollment. Here I updated this slide compared to the version that you all received in the budget workshop number 1. And now I'm including the actual enrollment at the end of the year, which was available by the time this presentation was due. So final enrollment was 3197. And then the next two numbers of 124 and 50, I'm using the same logic as before. I took the 3-year averages for the 3 prior years. So I am projecting a decrease in enrollment of about 174 students between the end of this year and the end of next year. So by the end of next year, we'll be right above 3,000 students. On the next slide, there's more information now regarding ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. So ESSER 1 was released via the CARES Act. This was the first stimulus package that was approved back when the pandemic began. Essentially, what the state did there, because schools were closed, they had this thing called ADA hold harmless. So essentially, schools were funded, weren't affected because the state closed, forced schools to close, and they used that stimulus money to kind of keep us, to make us whole, right? But they made us whole via 2 pots of money, state aid and federal money instead of all just state aid. ESSER 2 is the stimulus package that was approved in Washington in December. It was approved at the end of the year. And then ESSER 3 is the American Rescue Plan. That was a stimulus package that was just approved here in the spring under this new administration. So ESSER 3, if you look at the details, ESSER 3 was made available actually before ESSER 2. The biggest difference between ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 is for ESSER 3, ADA hold harmless will not apply. So what happened with ESSER 1, where the state didn't give us all our funding via state funds, they said, here's state money and the difference is federal. That's not going to happen with ESSER 3. With ESSER 3, all of the money is above and beyond, and it is not affecting state aid. For ESSER 2, though, it will partially affect funding if you're below hold harmless. I guess that's why it was the release of the money was delayed, because I guess the state and the feds were trying to, I guess, get on the same page regarding that. So essentially what's going to happen here is if districts ADA, if actual ADA was below the hold harmless threshold that the state came up with, then the state's going to use this ESSER 2 money to make us whole again, right? And it would be the same way. You get state money and you have to apply for ESSER 2 for the difference. If, however, our ADA is above the hold harmless, then we get all that money too. So different districts will they'll have different allocations based on that. If you're a district and our ADA is very, very low, and we need the entire allocation to get up to hold harmless, then you're being made whole that way. If your actual attendance was higher than the hold harmless, then you're getting extra money. In our case, we were above hold harmless the first 6 weeks, the second 6 weeks. The third 6 weeks, we dropped below hold harmless. And then for the fourth and the fifth, we were above the hold harmless. And then for the sixth 6 weeks, we dropped below hold harmless. So some of this money for us will be used as a hold harmless, but I do anticipate us receiving a good chunk of this money above and beyond as well. So that's good news to address, I guess, the loss in learning and the issues created by the pandemic. So we will get the full $15 million under ESSER 3, and we will get a portion of the ESSER 2 money too. On the next slide, here I'm going to now switch gears and jump back into the general. So updates from the figures that were provided at the last meeting. 2 attendance clerks were added back for Aleco and Borrego, and then a principal position was also added back for some run of these 3 were initially identified as potential cuts at the first time around. And then I do have a note on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. They allow supplanting, and so what supplanting is, there's a requirement with certain federal funds. So you have your local funds, and then you have state funds, and then you have federal funds. It's sort of like a pyramid. The idea of that is the higher the funding source, then there's a requirement that those monies should be supplemental, right? So federal dollars should supplement state dollars, and federal and state should supplement local dollars. Both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, however, allow supplanting, which means if I'm discharging something with local funds, I can move that up into ESSER 2 or ESSER 3. That's called supplanting. The kicker is, though, they require maintenance of effort. So if I decide to move up $1 million into ESSER 3, I still have to maintain my effort and spend $1 million in 190. You can get very creative with that because you can supplant. As long as you keep spending the money locally, you're meeting the intent of the law. So next week, I present the plan for ESSER 3. I'll give more information as to what some of the ideas are there. But essentially, what I am planning on doing is supplanting some dollars, right? Because what happened is we had a needs assessment. We let campuses come up with what their needs were, departments, and there's some of those needs that you cannot pay with ESSER 3 dollars because it doesn't meet any of the allowable uses. But if I supplant a local source of money, I'm freeing up money here. And by freeing up money here, I can pay for what the need is with the local dollars because I'd be charging the feds for the difference. And I'm still maintaining effort because I'm spending the same money with all my sources. And I guess that was the biggest key with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 is you can supplant, but don't cut back on spending. The point of this money is you're getting more money to address the needs of your school. You kind of have to figure out how best to determine that. So with that said, because there are steps required for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, those grant applications have not been submitted to the state. Yet next week we'll be adopting the 199 budget. So similar to the way we did last July and last August, we'll be adopting a budgeting with the 199 fund, but then I'll be presenting budget amendments in July and August to begin moving some of those monies around. Once the ESSER 3 application gets approved, that one is due before July 27th, and then hopefully once the ESSER 2 application gets approved, which is due September 2nd. So just a forewarning on there. On the next slide, here you see a comparison of the budget now by actual object code. Object code being the 4-digit code that defines the category of the service. So you have the first column, which is your 2021 amended budget. That's our current budget right now. And then you have the next column, which is the draft budget for next year, and then the last column is the difference between the two. I do want to note that for the 2021 amended budget, we do have a surplus because we got ESSER one funds and we did supplant money into ESSER one. So that's why we have a surplus here. So then, based on a lot of the staffing cuts that were presented last time around, the next column becomes your draft budget. That kind of shows you where we're at right now before considering the next item, which Cruz will present. So this is cumulatively what you see by category. So if you look at the difference between 2021 and 21-22, in both years, both cases where you see state program revenues, that's state aid. In both of those cases, 80% of our money is being brought in through state aid, which is pretty much because of students. Then if you look down at the expenditures under payroll costs, there's not much of a difference either. But 80% of our money is going out through payroll as well. You'll see the biggest difference is actually 6,500 debt service. It's because we have an I.S.D bond that defeases this school year, so we don't have to budget for that next year. On the next slide, here I took the data from the previous slide, right? The budget by object code, and I kind of broke it down into categories. So the top table shows you the amended budget, the bottom table shows you the draft budget. And the categories that I broke them out between, you still see the 6,100 payroll, the 6,200, the 6,300. You see those as columns, those are still there. Those numbers match the previous one, right? But I broke it down the left by campus budgets, department budgets, the food service fund, TRS on behalf calculation, and payroll budgets and stipend budgets. So here you see, you begin to this begins to dissect where the changes were between one year and another by these groups. So you'll see department budgets were cut, you'll see campus budgets went up a little bit, you'll see payroll budgets went down, stipend budgets went down. So you see the difference between the two because the top one is the amended, the bottom one is the draft budget. On the next slide, I further break data down. So on the previous slide, the first line had all of the campus budgets lumped into one account. Here, they're all broken down. They're all split across by school. And you get to see how their campus spending budgets were allotted, how the campuses allotted them. And you see the difference. Like I mentioned, they did get more money this year compared to last year, but they got more money in the special population programs, which we have to spend. It's the state mandated requirements, and they did get less money in general. The next two slides show you the same information but for different departments. So on slide number 10, on page number 10, the first one you see the top, the 2021 amended budget. That's our current budget right now. So the first department you see is athletics. You see bilinguals, board of trustees, the K, SIP software. So these are all the many groups of pots of money, the way they're set up in the system by department or by purpose. Like copy machines, there are copy machines at every department, but instead of having every department budget their amount for that one copy machine and having one purchase order for every single copy machine, I have one purchase order for all the copy machines, and I run them all through that pot of money, which I control. So here you see the total, once again, by category: payroll, contracted services, supplies, other operating costs, debt service, 6,500, and capital outlay. And then on the following page, you'll see their proposed budget for the new year. So that's, want to see where the budget cuts fell. That's how you can compare both of them and see what the budget cuts were. So like I mentioned, 6,500 category is zero now because we don't have that debt service one. And so finally, on the next slide, called budget by function. So once you started with the budget line object, which showed you the categories of how we were spending the money. And then we dissected it and showed you the differences by budget categories, by the campuses, and then by departments. And so once you wrap all that back up and you prepare the budget the way the board adopts it, it becomes the budget by function. So the revenues don't change in the way they're presented, but the expenditures do. At this point, you have payroll in multiple function codes. You can have supplies in multiple function codes. This is the way the budget gets presented and gets approved by the board at each function. So here, the first group, you'll see Fund 101 and Fund 199. Both of those combined make up the amended budget. And you have the next group, which is year 21, 22. That's the proposed budget for next year. So there, once again, you have the 101 fund, and then you have the 199 fund, and combined, it makes it the draft budget. And finally, the next slide, rolling everything up and saying, okay, if we just look at revenues, expenditures, and the difference last year versus next year, then the draft budget right now includes a surplus of about $457,000. But there's a note on the bottom, the Pathway of Champions project that's being funded by the fund balance. So it's a one-time project. It's a one-time cost, right? So it's deceiving to say we only have $457,000 in operating expenses, because we actually have a little bit more, because since that's being funded through the savings, if you back that out, there's about $662,000 in surplus, right? Assuming enrollment comes in at or not lower than the projection. So it's a healthy draft at this point in time. And see, this does not include costs that would be supplanted through ESSER funds. It also does not include indirect costs. So when we get federal grants, we're allowed to take a portion of that money for the purpose of administering the grant, right? So if we're paying an employee with a federal grant, my payroll staff is spending time. So I'm able to charge the grant for that time. We're printing checks. We're able to charge them for that time. So that comes into the general fund as revenue. So there'll be a plan presented for what to do with those indirect costs on the ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3 grants. Essentially, a lot of the projects that were previously presented that we had no funding for, bond proceeds or previous projects that have been presented through budget hearings, a lot of those, I have them on the list, and pretty much they're going to come back. So a lot of people are going to be very happy. They're going to see a lot of that money coming back because of things like the indirect costs in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, and because of the provision that allows supplanting doesn't require supplementing. So with that said, I am available to answer any questions the board may have.
What did you say? The 6,100 was?
6,100 is payroll costs. So it includes payroll costs, it includes stipends, health insurance, Medicare, substitute costs. The TRS on behalf also falls under the 6,100s.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Rivas.
Thank you. See y'all next
Very
week.
good, yes, sir. Yeah, like the show. Thank you. Item 3B, consider a possible board action on approval of salaries for teachers and employees for the 2021-2022 school year. Ms. Blanca Cruz, Human Resource Director. Ms. Cruz, you have reported.
Good evening, Ms. Rico, Dr. Mr. Chavez, Board of Trustees, and we do have some colleagues here, so good evening. Thank you for allowing us to bring this item forward, a little bit ahead of the game. I know this is always done with a budget adoption, but this is really, really gonna help, and it's already helping for so many reasons. So I did send out a packet to all of you with a lot of information. So thank you for taking the time to review that. I'll be going over section by section. And throughout every section, I will ask the board, I will say what the items for action are. And then you'll have a discussion to see how you want to proceed, even though a motion will not be made right there and then. But at the end, when the motion is made to approve the compensation plan as presented, it will be with the understanding that everything that was discussed will make it into the compensation plan. So I'll start with page number 3. This is where you see the pay models for the different scenarios. So I'll give you a little bit of time to get them before I start talking about each of those. So on the left, we have the pay groups, right? So we have the different categories of our pay grades, starting with the teacher pay, teachers, of course, nurses, librarians, then we move to the administrative professionals, administrative technical, instructional support, and operation support. So that is the column on the left. Then as you start moving to the right, you start seeing model 1, model 2, 3, and 4. A side note, the draft budget that Mr. Rivas prepared includes model number 1, which is a 2% across the board. It does not mean that it has to stay that way. It's just to let you all know so you get an idea of what was already included in the draft. Yes, on that document. The model number 1 and 2 were the models that I.S.D is recommending, and one of the reasons for the recommendation is that we looked at they looked at all the compensation for all pay groups and determined, this is where we want to go with it as far as equity adjustment, so that we can make sure we're comfortable with the market, comfortable with the peers, comfortable with the the mid market, that 90%, and they determined the 2% across the board and the 1% across the board accomplishes that. It keeps everybody, I guess, leveled, and it stops us from becoming to have those differences again. So those are the 2 models that are across the board for all employees. As we move forward to the right, you see model number 3. That one does have a difference between teachers and all other employees. Teachers would receive under this model a 2% increase, whereas all other employees would receive a 1%. We did have a request during the last meeting to bring forward model number 4, which will mean teachers will receive a 2% increase, hourly employees would receive a 2% increase, and administrative professionals 1%. All the pay increases are done from the midpoint of each of those pay grades for each specific family. So those are the 4 models that we have. I can answer questions at this time if any of you have questions regarding any of the models. Right, so for that portion of the compensation, as we move to the next page, number 4, you notice that the first item there is to select a pay model to be implemented for the 2021-2022 school year. At the bottom of that, I also added another area of recommendations that has been provided to us. We do have some employees, not too many, but we do have several that are already beyond their max pay as per their assigned pay grade. The board will need to decide whether those employees will receive the same amount of increase as all other employees, being that they're considered already under the max. Or the second recommendation there is for those employees to receive half of the general pay increase. And the third one will be to provide a one-time payment in lieu of a pay increase to their base salary, so that they don't keep getting further and further away from their base pay, being that they're already on the max. So those are the 3 options provided by I.S.D, but I guess I'll start with the pay model want to have a discussion about how you want to proceed.
Just to see what the. Bro, this is the time to bring it up, but you know what, I was reviewing what people are being paid with, and I had a question as to why our security supervisors paid like way above the average for the school districts. I was comparing it to Sleta and Socorro I.S.D. and also Socorro, they have peace officers, meaning that they're licensed to the state to be a Texas peace officer, but comparing it to districts that have just security officers. We're paying about $10 more per hour. Is there any reason as to why we don't have the amount of employees that, let's say, this letter does? I'm just wondering, how is that? How did that come to be?
I know for purposes of what's being presented today, Tasby looked at the market midpoint and compared it to our district. So if we were within that market, that 90%, there was no need to increase. What they determined for every position to include that one was that an adjustment, and I don't know that specific pay family, and I can look more into that one, but I know every single one was looked at as compared to the market midpoint value.
Yeah, because I was just looking at it. I reviewed the TASB report that they did, and it didn't really say anything about that position, but I was just wondering what the responsibility entails. How many? I would like to know how many employees he supervises and exactly what is it that he does. Just because I saw that there's some discrepancy on some of the positions. I'd just like to know what exactly his responsibilities are. Why is it that we pay? Because I consider it a little overpaying by a lot.
And this is a security supervisor?
I think it's like at $30-something an hour.
I'll get that information, Mr. Jones. And just to help with that decision making, I did include a table that I know was a request from the last year's board meeting on compensation. And I believe it's on page 15. That's where we included information about surrounding districts and where they're at with teacher skills. Course number one is that, and we would end up with each of those scenarios, we would still be around a number 5 in the ranking of those districts. Reason being is we're all moving at the same rate, so as we increase every year, they're increasing as well. So that is the reason why, even though, yes, our pay will be increased for teachers, and that will be put on a decision that you all make today, other districts are doing the same, and that happens every single year. So it's hard to close that gap unless something very dramatic happens, like we get 3,000 more students, right? And we can catch up. But that is the reason for us remaining on that same spot.
So what we have here, what you're saying, we approve any of these, well, with the exception of model 2, will be in line with being competitive and not falling a lot worse than because I know last year we had to more or less play catch up.
Yes.
So that's what I'm trying to say. We won't. I know that. I mean, we put it up, and of course other districts are. I mean, they put theirs as well, but we're gonna find ourselves again trying to play catch up down the road. I know we can't be always adjusting it, but I just don't want to get caught again having to do a big chunk.
Yes. So the goal is to not fall into that again. Every year we will review the compensation plan. We'll look to see how far are we from the highest, and those decisions will be, that information will be brought to you so that there's transparency. We know we're not going to be the highest because we're just not the largest district in the area. So small districts are are always trying to compete, and I always say it's like a silent competition. Nobody wants to say what they're doing with compensation until, you know, it's out there and we all go through the websites and find out, you know, what everybody did. But to that point, we will make sure that we continue to look at that every year so that we don't end up with having to come back and say, you know what, this year we have to go $3,000 because we're so behind. The goal is to keep it steady so that we sustain it every year.
That's the reason I crossed out mile number 2, starting teacher pay. I went 52, 250, so I crossed that one out. I read it to the kill, we're gonna go backwards here, we do that one.
And
When we say, teacher, you know, increase, teacher, are we just doing it for teachers or anyone who works with students?
we're doing it for anyone that's within the teacher pay scale. We have several positions that fall in that scale. And to that point, Ms. Hernandez, I wanted to make a recommendation. Our counselors are currently under the administrative professional family, but they're not administrators. So my recommendation was going to be to put them with the teachers for pay purposes, whatever pay raise is approved for teachers, that it transfers over to counselors and our student activities manager, who's also a teacher. This will be the first year that the student activity manager is not on the teacher pay scale. That was a recommendation that has been made, and it's part of this compensation plan. But that does not mean that we want to get away from providing the same amount of pay increase as that of a teacher.
I agree with the home counselors, but we have also, like speech therapists that provide therapy every day to our students who fall under the administrative category. Our teachers, they're teaching their students. What about the aides? Are aides considered under that category?
No, they would be considered under the instructional support hourly category. But I do want to mention that the board may decide what specific groups they want to increase and by how much. You're not bound to, well, this is it, you know what I mean? So it's really a decision of the board of trustees as to who gets what. Welcome. And just a little bit more information I have on other districts. And Isleta I.S.D. approved a 3% pay raise for all employees just recently. They also approved a retention stipend for $2,000. Only difference is they're splitting it in 3 parts. They're not paying it all at once. El Paso I.S.D. 1% across the board, all employees. They did provide for 2 retention stipends for $2,000 each. So total of $4,000 for the year.
Are there any bring districts as well? I think Vegas is 1,000.
Ravens 1,000, Socorro 1,000, Tornillo 1,000, and I know Clint I.S.D. is going to propose 2,000, but they're also doing 2 payments as well. And Clint I.S.D. is proposing a 3% increase for all employees, whereas Socorro approved a 4% for all employees. So just more information then.
Looking at model 1, that would just be 2% clear across the board, right? Correct. Everybody would be the 2%.
Correct.
Salary and support.
Also, something else I should mention, when we did this calculation, we had 573 employees. You know, that was a moment in time when this data was collected. As of today, we have 544. And we have included every position here, but we do have some federally funded positions, so not all the costs will be on the general fund. We do have some employees that will be covered by their grant. So it's just estimated numbers, you know.
So we asked
Or we keep going, but we just want to tell us, we'll keep as many more chances on there.
It sounds like, I'm just worried about the restart to that. All behind again. Assumptions the districts are doing are, what assumptions you're making? See, I'm not sure if we're doing that now, but back in the days, we said to ourselves, let's adopt the module teacher salary after we see what other districts did. We would go back and try to be competitive and not be the first ones and then jump this. I'm not sure that's what we're doing now. That's what we're doing a couple of years back when we allowed other school districts to do their this and that, then we would follow suit if we had to, or at least try to be competitive. I think we're the first ones they're gonna see, well, so I decided to do 2%. So they clear myself, okay, let's get 3%. So then that's where we fall behind the curve. And I think we gotta, every year we gotta study the salary scales. If you wanna retain staff, it's not just because I am paying a little bit better. Just claims not a better district.
And I can tell you that just looking at the 2021, the current teacher salaries, when I look at that, I assume even if they gave a 4% raise, where would that take them, right? So when we look at that, there's such a big gap that our district could not afford to pay for. And I know that this is the year where even an outside company came in and looked at everybody to see, okay, what can we do for Sanelli, size of Sanelli, what can Sanelli afford, they look at enrollment, all those things, right? So this is what they proposed, and looking at this, even Isleta, they're almost at 55,000. For us, that would be,
I mean, looking at plan, Neil, David's, and even if you look at the plan scale, many years we're more or less okay.
yes, and
It's
that's
just a start up.
but we tell teachers, that's a conversation we have as well. Look, the starting pay might look, it is higher, but we compensate for experience too. So there comes a point where we're right there, if not higher than some districts with experience and pay. I just looking at this for Tornillo and Fabians who have their board meeting today, that's why they couldn't provide any information as to what they were planning on doing. See, they're at 51 to 67. That it means that they would have to probably do a 3 or 4% increase to get to where we're at under some of these pay models. It's 2%.
Yeah, one constitutions that involve. One uses to have across the board.
So since there's no motion yet, we'll just make a note of
That's
that.
what I get kind of confused, because I mean, we're saying what we wanna do, but then we gotta come out and make that.
Correct. So that we have,
I'm not following how we're doing this, but saying, okay, where we're gonna go is, because at the time we're making a motion, we're not all in agreement. So right now, we're changing a consensus. So my thing is that, yeah, we can talk about it, but then we decide at the end.
correct.
So I'm not sure why we're taking a consensus. Yeah, consensus of what we wanna do.
The purpose, the compensation has always been approved as one motion. So whatever discussions happen and it takes place, just like last year, at the end, it was decided, okay, we looked at the teacher scale, this was decided. So as part of the compensation plan, that becomes part of the plan through the board minutes. But you're not, because you're right, you may change your mind at the time the motion is made and then we come back and look at that item again. So just because that's the agreement right now, doesn't mean that will be the motion later on as we go through through steps. It kind of gives us more guidance as to how we proceed for purposes of providing clear information for minutes and for us as well. The next item here was regarding the pay increases to employees who are over the max, if they will receive the same amount of increase, half of the increase, or a one-time payment.
We do the pay increase that throughout pay scales.
It does not throw out the pay scale. What it does is that it gets those employees further away from their assigned pay grade, and then we gotta look at peer equity. That's what it does, but our pay grades will remain the same. And historically, the district board of trustees has approved the same amount of increase for those employees.
And if it's a one-time payment,
It will depend on the each employee individually where they're at on their midpoint. But again, that'll come back once you make that.
What's more cost effective?
It's really the same cost, except as a one-time payment, the board may decide next year we're not going to do that, so you have to sustain that increase. Whereas when it becomes part of the base pay, we're bound to sustaining it. So on the next section is in regards to the bilingual stipend. There was a request to bring forward some information in regards to how our district is in comparison to other districts in the area with a bilingual stipend. Based on the information that we have, we do pay 25% over the market value, which is $2,000. The district compensates $2,500 as a stipend for bilingual. The highest in our area was Tornillo I.S.D with $3,000. So I included that information there as well to see if the board wanted to consider any changes to that.
Pretty decent.
In addition to that, we are recommending the addition of the dual language stipend for when that's implemented. We already have something on our stipend chart, and it would be for the same amount. It is the same certification. So
Explain that. We're gonna give two.
So you're either a bilingual teacher or a dual language teacher. Both will receive the same amount of stipend for $2,500, regardless of which assignment.
It's either or, right?
Either or. All right, so section number 3, which will be page number 9. Another request from the budget workshop was to bring forward 2 scenarios regarding retention stipends for employees. One would be for $1,000. The second scenario being $2,000. So you have before you again a calculation based on 573 employees. And the first table shows, the total cost, assuming there's no distinction between a full-time and a part-time employee. Everybody would receive the same amount that the board approves. As you move down on the page, you have the $1,000 pay model, which does assume a distinction between the part-time and full-time employees on both models. So that's why you see the different costs for the different items.
This would be covered with those ESSER funds, right? That's the plan.
And it's something that we can change next year. Like, we have done this year.
It's a one-time
It's a one,
retention.
yes, correct.
Stipend.
So SB 3 has a grant period of 3 years, possibly 4 with carryover. Right? The idea behind SB 3 is kids are not going to catch up in 1 year on a strategic 3-year plan. So as part of the SB 3, depending on where the conversation goes with this retention stipend, we can earmark 3 years worth of retention stipends. Meaning the $2,000 could be covered within SR 3 for 3 years in a row with the idea that that's going to minimize employee turnover. We're keeping the staff we have, the staff that knows our kids, and we don't fall farther behind. We don't have to do 3 years. We can just do 1 year, but we have the option to do all 3 years. And because ESSER 3 is $16 million, it's tons of money, right? So the $2,000, $1.1 million over 3 years is about $3.5 million, right? So it is affordable over 3 years if that is the long-term direction this board wants to move. Subject to granted.
Hi, this is Miss Garcia. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I am in agreement with with the 2,000 stipend. I think our teachers more than deserve it. If we could give them much more, I know we would. But while having those funds available, I think that'd be awesome. I think they've gone above and beyond this year, and they're deserving of it. So.
Now, this is for everybody or just teachers?
Everybody will
Everybody.
receive.
And then when we make the motion, 'cause that's what I'm confused with referring to, is it gonna be like, are we gonna have to, because I'm making notes.
I will,
But then this is stuff dependent on grant approval and all that other.
yes, once we get to that part, I will summarize the list for all of you, and then you can make the motion at that. So. But that's important, subject to grant approval. So on page number 10, on page number 10, this is an administrative recommendation to recognize the efforts and the willingness of our guest teachers and substitute workers to come in and work during the difficult time that we experienced. The grant does allow, if approved, to pay these retention stipends as well. So we have a recommendation there for our guest teachers, which is our first table. Teachers that worked in a regular assignment, not long-term, which would be 10 days or more, would receive $250 as a one-time payment, assuming they come back to our district and they're still active as of October 1st of this year. And it would be the same eligibility criteria, but guest teachers that served on a long-term assignment during this year would receive $500. You see there that we had 41 total guest teachers active with us this year. So we hope to attract more, and I think this really, really helped. And the bottom table shows you our support services substitutes, same proposal as the guest teachers on a regular assignment of $250 for them as well as a one-time payment, assuming they're with us this next year as of October 1st. So that is the recommendation from administration.
Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
I want to commend you, first of all, for putting this item on here. How many other districts are doing this for their guest teachers? Do you know of any?
I know of one, so I won't take the full credit, but I do look around as well. So that's how we determined and came to you with this recommendation. So guest teachers, I know of one district. I don't know of any district that are doing substitute for support services.
I think it's a great idea. Thank you for putting it in here.
Oh, you're very welcome. I want to keep all of them. So we'll come back to this when you make the motion. You can decide the amounts. So we'll move on to page number 13. I always provide a guest teacher pay comparison just for informational purposes. We feel that we don't need to adjust anything this year, but I am confident that next year we'll probably have to look at this and determine if any pay increases are needed in this area. We already visited page number 16. That was the information with the different teacher skills across the region. The next section there, starting on page 17, is also just was for your information so that we could show the changes that occurred on each of those pay scales. So unless anybody has any questions on that section, I can move on to actual approval of the compensation plan. May I move forward with the summary? So as in regards to the pay model that the board wishes to consider, it would be model number 1, 2% increase of the midpoint for all employees. In regards to the increases for employees who are over their maximum pay grade, how would the board like to proceed?
Now, when you say they're over, that means when they reach over the maximum, right?
Yes.
You know what, I was noticing that the difference between the starting teacher and the top, I guess, 26 years is that one.
Yes.
It's not that
20,
much of a difference. And I understand we can, and we're limited by the money that we have to use at the district. I don't know, I mean, I feel that they should get the same increase as everybody else. I don't know how everybody else feels about it. They say, I just feel that, based on the pay scale, I don't see any.
I don't know, do what I'm trying to say. We're upping the starting pay. This is happening throughout any employers. So they start out the pay, but then they don't really compensate the rest of the group. So what he's saying, there's only 10,000 difference from 53 to 63 from 0 to 25 years. So it's like, it's better to come in now at 0, being here 25 years and just getting 10,000 more. So I have a new teacher's almost making. So I don't know about this year, but we might need to adjust it. It's a bigger gap. I mean, 25 years. So we want to compensate.
And let's, I just want to make a note here. So anytime we increase the 0 years of experience, which is the initial, right? And then we have to look at the gap that we increase in between, because we can't make that a larger increase than what we're giving, than what the board is approving for the teachers on that scale, because we always got to look at that as well. So that's also another constraint, if you may, because the bigger that gap on that scale, we have to adjust everybody else to that same.
No, I guess what Mr. Madrid, sorry, what we're trying to say is that the pay scale should be adjusted to where the gap is already greater. I feel the same way. I don't want to say it in a nice way, but I don't think we're showing appreciation to the people that have been here 25 years.
And just so you know, we bring this forward because we need the board approval to pay above the max. But I totally agree with you as far as the retention. I just have to bring this forward.
So the recommendation would be to provide the same pay increase to employees who are over the max.
Yeah, correct.
Within the same range. So they would also get the 50%.
Last year when we did the adjustments, there were years of surveys that were different from. So my thinking is I mean, I don't know, just throwing it out down the road, can we like go with like say 18 to 25 or 20 to 25 can do a bigger,
That can be considered absolute.
jump to a different scale.
Yeah, I guess on tier scales.
It would be,
So that increase is
It's like
larger.
fingers is
towards the
0
bottom.
to 3, 3 to 6, or 0 to 5, 5 to 10.
And as far as the HB3 package that came out last budget year, we did exactly that, you know, and that was a requirement that any teacher 5 years, with 5 years of experience or more, had to be paid more than those teachers that have less years of experience. So that was built to this compensation package as well. But I agree, as we move forward, we can always on balancing that experience towards the bottom of the scale as well.
So we need attention stipends to kind of offset, to make up for the, you know, as you said, it creates a problem every time we just move it up. So, pay it, would you do that?
It may create a need for equity adjustments for teachers, because if, as an example, if I'm a teacher and I have 5 years of experience and I'm making, I don't know, 55,000, then the new scale is going to reflect maybe 57,000. Now, I would have to receive a $2,000 increase to be equitable to the new pay scale.
And then those years of experience are anywhere, right? It's not here, it's.
Teaching years of experience. That's exclusive for teachers. So if I understand correctly, it's for 2% across the board for all employees, including employees over the max. Okay. For the bilingual stipend and dual language stipend at 2,500. The one retention stipend for $2,000 for all employees. Would there be a distinction between full-time and part-time?
I was going to recommend that we make the distinction between full-time and part-time.
The consideration for the one-time retention stipend for guest teachers and substitute workers. Subject to grant approval. And those are all the items related to the compensation package. So if I may ask the board to consider the approval of the compensation plan as discussed for the 2021-2022 year as presented by administration. All employee equity adjustments.
I so move.
So do we have any further discussion?
Oh.
So we have a motion by Ms. Garcia, a second. Second. By Ms. Hernandez. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving along to item, thank you, Mr. Thank you for item 4.8, with C, consent agenda. Do we have any questions on any of those items that you like to pull out?
Next one is there any updates on that? On the pathways that we're working on? I haven't seen much out there, but we have an update. Like to hear.
If I can, I'm sorry, if I can ask Kodak so you can prepare the website, because we have the website with pictures. Go ahead, Mr. Martinez.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Licon, board members, and Superintendent Mr. Chavez. I'm just happy to report that the Pathway Chapter project is moving along. Sure, right? So there was a little bit of concern there with materials and all that, but the contractor has prepared himself. He has everything inside. We broke ground. We dug the footings. The footings have been poured. We have built up the benches. We're ready to pour the actual tops of the benches. We've poured most of the footings for the actual monuments. All the lighting has been installed. Not all the lighting, but all the lighting ballards, the 22 ballards that will light up the Pathway of Champions. Although not the lighting circuits have been run for accent lighting to the main plaza as well. To include the monuments, so it's looking good. It's looking good. You see the pictures, I think it doesn't do the project justice. So if you see it in person, I would really appreciate it being done, and it's, I mean, I make it a point to stop as often as I can there because it really motivates me and I can't wait to see the final products. This is gonna be nice. I mean, when you see this light up at night, you're gonna be like, oh, this was all.
There are completion date,
Excuse me?
completion date.
We're hoping for the end of July. That's what we're hoping. You know, August might be a possibility. Now, that's with the construction of the actual plaza and the area that's going to be the asphalt and all that. One thing that, you know, that it is, this is the thing is about the monuments. The monuments, the lead time on those monuments was 6 to 8 months. So we're gonna complete everything. We're gonna have to patiently wait for those monuments to arrive.
Better make sure they're coming. Better make sure they're coming.
No, they are. We're actually
We
looking-
offered to go get them, sir.
We'll rent an 18-wheeler, we'll go pick them up if we have to, but they're being worked on. Actually, we're working on the proofs right now, you know, we're probably on the third review as far as the proofs for the monuments themselves. I mean, it's gonna be nice, but we have to wait till probably December when we actually see 100% completion, substantial completion, including the monuments. It's looking nice.
And so I do want to thank Mr. Martinez, he and or his staff for taking pictures and, you know, I'd like to thank Horacio for the website that he is keeping up, and it's like a running timeline of the project as it's going. And we have some other ideas. Our committee continues to meet on Thursdays. I think we took a hiatus during the graduation day. I don't think we had because we had other things to do, right? But we are documenting it as we go. We have other ideas that we will continue exploring out to see how we can get, you know, even alumni involved and things like that. So this is just, we're taking it in phases, and we're excited. And I agree with Mr. Martinez when he says, you know, just to stop by there, it gives us a, like, okay, we can keep, yeah, it gives us perspective and hope for the project we're working on. Because we do believe it's going to be very awesome and a great place for our kids, our students, and our families, communities to reflect on. So it is noticeable as we were coming back from dinner, and it was so dark. It was really neat to see the lights and it was being lit up. It was so
We
exciting.
actually told our contractor, go shut them down, because we didn't want to reach the surprise.
To see it, I did get to see
Well, at
it.
least we saw it.
Yes,
That's great.
it does look really neat. It really does look neat. Yes, it's exciting. Oh, wow, that's neat. It's awesome. Thank you.
It's a great evening.
So, if we don't have any questions, may I have a motion for item, any more questions for item 4A? May I please have a motion on the floor to accept the items?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Madrid, second by Ms. Hernandez, approved the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On to item 5, executive session. The board will enter into a closed meeting to discuss personnel matters, to consult with attorney, to discuss real estate matters, to consider recommendations for hiring of personnel or termination of personnel, and other personnel matters under section 551.071, 551.072, and 551.074 of the Texas Government Code. Item 5A, discussion regarding certain employees assignments and reassignments for 2021 and 2022 at 6:41 p.m. Please move our cameras and we're going into executive.
1.
It is 7:26 p.m. The board will return to open session to take possible action on the matters discussed in executive session, of which we have no items to discuss. We'll now move on to items. Next meeting date, special meeting, the Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Regular board meeting Wednesday, July 14th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. May we have a motion to adjourn at 7:26? I so move. Okay. By Ms. Hernandez, a second.
Second.
By Mr. Chavez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're at 7.
Thank you, Horacio.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.